Okay, so good evening, everyone, and just to welcome you to this evening's featured lecture by Kerry Doyle, Director of the Rubin Center, El Paso, Texas, and this is chaired by Fiach MacConghail. Our previous conversations earlier today have focused on how Irish and European artists negotiate the ecologies of space and place to produce works of public art that resonate with communities or locales in which they exist. This evening's talk, however, expands this inquiry to explore the contestations of place and art making in a border community on the US-Mexico border. So before I hand you over to Fiach, who will introduce and chair this event, just to remind everybody that if you would like to ask a question, can you please put it into the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Make sure that your mic is turned off. If you'd like to make a comment or share a resource or a link that you think might be useful, you can put this into the chat function. And I also encourage you to join us again tomorrow at 11 a.m. where we're going to kick off Public Art Conversations' second day. So with that, I'm going to pass you over now to Fiach.
Thank you, Grania. Hello and welcome to this evening's session of the Public Art Now Conversations, organised by TU Dublin and the Grange Government Development Agency. The theme of discussion centred around practice, politics and publics fits neatly into what we will be hearing at this evening's session. This will be a talk or presentation by Kerry Doyle, all the way from the Rubin Center for the Visual Arts at the University of Texas at El Paso, on the US-Mexico border. As you may know, Kerry is director and chief curator of the Rubin Center, and she specializes in curatorial projects that are interdisciplinary, participatory, and performative, with a special focus on the border as subject and site, and regularly collaborates with individuals and institutions both from El Paso and Ciudad Juárez. Kerry will set her presentation around the work of Rafael Lozano-Hemmer's Border Tuner. Some of you may have known Raphael's work because he worked with us in Dublin in 2004 on the enlargement of the EU and a vectorial elevation project. I would also like to acknowledge the presence at this talk of two of Kerry's colleagues, in particular her co-curator on Border Tuner, Leon de la Rosa, and Edgar Picasso, the production director. So a virtual welcome to Ireland, Kerry.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. I want to thank you, Fiach, for chairing this conversation, and also a special thank you to Jenny Houghton, who invited me, and to Roshan and Grania, who have just been fantastic at shepherding us through all this. And I did have a chance to sit in on the second of the two conversations this morning and really enjoyed that as well. So that's very much in my mind, particularly the democratization of public art and some of the issues around time and money as well. So again, it's a pleasure to be here tonight. And I think I'm going to go ahead and start by giving you a sense of where we are at here on the US-Mexico border. So I'm going to share my screen, and I have a number of slides about the border, because I want to give you an idea of what this place is. It's really not possible to understand Raphael's work without understanding where we're coming from. So this photo that I'm starting with is actually from the parking lot of the Rubin Center for the Visual Arts at the University of Texas at El Paso, to give you an idea that we're not just near the border, but practically on it. So just about 1/8 of a mile from the US-Mexico border. And it very much colors all that we do. The University of Texas at El Paso is a pretty unique institution in and of itself. About 85% of our students are of Mexican descent. 10 to 15% live at least some of the time in Juárez, and about 5% cross over daily. Most people have Spanish as their native language at the university, and you'll hear both spoken everywhere. So this is where we are. We are on the US-Mexico border, and I thought I'd give you a little map so you get a sense just kind of in the region of where we are. El Paso and Ciudad Juárez are actually a continuous metropolis between the two cities. So if you were to see us from a satellite, this is from a distance, the two cities really are almost indistinguishable at a distance. And, you know, the US-Mexico border as a whole, I think many people are familiar with the mediated version of it, and it's often been reduced to collateral in an increasingly contentious national and international policy debate. It's universally portrayed in the media as a receptacle of casualties from our disastrous immigration policy here in the United States, and also a dangerous battleground that reflects failed relationships between the United States and Latin America in general. And what I hope to convey today, both through this conversation and through the project itself, is that the reality on the ground is much more complex, with the history, culture, and politics, as well as economics that are rarely divided neatly along borderlines here. One thing I'd like to say about the development of Ciudad Juárez is the role that the maquiladora industry, and some of you might be familiar with NAFTA's policies in the United States that allowed for the migration of capital across borders with very little consequences to take advantage of cheap labor, and at the same time sort of brought tougher enforcement policies for labor who wanted to move. And certainly Europe has this history as well, but it's a very big part of why the two cities are here, and Juárez in particular, why it's here and why it's so big. Juárez is the largest city in the region. It has a population of about 1,300,000 as of 2015. And El Paso is the next largest city in the region at about 700,000 as of 2018. One of the things to know about Juárez is that the population in 1955 in Juárez was only about 125 people, and that ballooned up to over 1 million people in 1995. And some of the things we're going to talk about today is sort of the asymmetrical infrastructure on both sides of the border, but certainly a lot of that had to do with the placement of US factories on the Mexican side of the border. So it created an infrastructure for the economics, but as you can see from this picture of one of the colonias in the outskirts, one of the neighborhoods in the outskirts of Juárez, there was no living infrastructure put into place. So these factories drew more than 1 million people up to the border in the second half of the 20th century, but there was no cultural infrastructure, living infrastructure, health infrastructure to support that. So it's not just an issue of the difference between the United States and Mexico, but really an issue of specific policies that have developed that has created this kind of asymmetry on both sides of the border. And we'll continue to talk about that as we talk about other aspects of the project. One of the things I do want to mention about the two cities is that El Paso is also one of the poorest cities in the United States. So one of the things we say often is that anything you can say about the border, you can say the opposite, it's true. So there's quite a big difference between the style of living on the US and the Mexican side of the border, but actually it's a lot closer, the two cities, than either city is towards other parts of their own countries. The median income in the United States last year was $62,000. The median income in El Paso is $23,000. And the median income as reported by the government in Juárez is about $19,000, but it doesn't reflect the significant number of people that are working in the informal economy who'd be making a lot less than that. There's 4 international points of entry that connect Ciudad Juárez and El Paso, and those crossings every year combined in a normal year, not a COVID year, would have about 20 million crossings in the region back and forth across the border. Between 2017 and 2019, 62% of El Pasoans surveyed had crossed the border into Juárez, and about 25% of people from Juárez had crossed the border into El Paso. So there's this natural back and forth. The reason that there's a lower number of people crossing from Juárez into El Paso has to do with that the majority of Juárez's population doesn't have a visa to cross into the United States. So those visas, one of our conversations today is going to be about the privilege connected to the ability to cross back and forth. And those visas really go to people who are working in the formal economy, who have some money, who are able to qualify for that process. 90% of the people in Juárez who said they didn't visit El Paso in the past year said the reason was that they didn't have a visa to do so. So again, there is overlap and there is a lot of sort of back and forth between the two cities. Like the university, El Paso is about 80% Mexican or Mexican American, and almost 50% of our population in El Paso lived in Mexico until the age of 12. So almost 50% of El Pasoans lived in Mexico for some of their most formative years. And again, we're talking about this project that connects the two sides of the border. And I want to just point out that that we really weren't doing anything new. There's these connections here are natural and a part of many people's lives. Many people have family on both sides of the border, are crossing regularly for work, for healthcare, for all sorts of reasons. So this is really a unique part of the border region in that the connections are not only economic connections, but family connections and cultural connections and language connections that have always existed between the two places. It's impossible to talk about the border and certainly to talk about this project without talking about the militarization of the border. So the US-Mexico border is one of the world's most militarized border, even though the two countries are not at war. Massive increases in appropriations for border security have resulted in a decrease in real security in border communities, disrupting the quality of life and the economies of the border and eroding human rights in the region. Since 1993, and this is directly alongside of the economic policies that I mentioned that brought the maquiladoras to the region, the US has pursued a policy of militarization at the Mexican border. And since 1993, at least 7,000 immigrants have lost their lives crossing the border. And many of those are in direct relation to immigration policies that push people to the outskirts of the city, that have increased trafficking across borders, human trafficking across borders, and basically made the crossing of the border a dangerous experience. You know, this border wall runs through both of our cities. It's not, it hasn't historically done that in the spot that we're looking at right here, which is on the edge of Juárez and the edge of El Paso, was totally open in the 1990s and people crossed back and forth quite freely. But now that border wall runs for about 50 miles on either side of the city. So directly through the urban area of the city. And there is, this is actually, you're actually looking at a different part of the border. This is Brownsville, El Paso, Brownsville, Texas. But militarization means that there are constantly border patrol who are interrupting the flow of migrants, arresting people whose only crime is coming into the United States without documents, and using military tactics to patrol the region. So they're not trained like police, officers might be inside of a city to de-escalate, hopefully, de-escalate conflicts and work with the community at some level. They're trained as if they were in a war zone. And this picture was actually taken at the same period that border tuner was up in El Paso and Juárez. And these are Central American refugees who were trapped at the time in Ciudad Juárez because of immigration policy that would restrict the amount of people who could apply for asylum at the border. So it is important to know that this is sort of the landscape that the project is taking place in. The images I'm going to show you and the tone of the project is a lot about celebrating cross-border relationships and celebrating the ways that we're connected. Those of us that are on the project team are very aware that to cross the border in and of itself is an enormous privilege. And those of us that consider ourselves to be fronterizos or to consider ourselves to be border people are operating in a reality where many people don't have that choice. So I wanted to share that just to sort of set up the scene so you have a little bit of a better understanding. There's obviously so much more to be said about the border, but as a point of introduction. And really briefly as well, I wanted to introduce the Rubin Center for the Visual Arts. As I mentioned, we're on the campus of the University of Texas at El Paso. We're a tiny organization. There's 4 professional members on staff, 3 right now. We're actually hiring a curator this year, but and we work with 8 student interns at any given time. Our core, this is our building here on the campus with an installation by Máximo González. But our core mission is to bring art and ideas from other places. So we have a student body that for economic reasons and to some extent, because of our regional isolation, we're very geographically isolated, doesn't travel. So when we were formed as a unit in 2004, we were charged with bringing international artists to the US-Mexico border, where we've developed a specialty in site-specific commissions and also showing media across the disciplines. Our location on the border has attracted a lot of artists that are sort of bigger than our profile and bigger than our budget. And that's something that we've taken advantage of over the years. I'll just show you just to give you an idea of the different kinds of work that we're showing. Some of you might recognize Brian McGuire's work there. He did a cross-border show with us a couple years ago. We're showing work in all media. Our vision statement is to be the place where contemporary art meets contemporary life. So whenever we're showing work, we're also engaging audiences in that work. Again, much of the work we do is related to the border and is site-specific. We also serve as a training ground for future professionals in the arts. Our students are mostly low income, mostly first-generation college students. They're the first people in their family to go to college, and in a region where there's very little infrastructure on either sides of the border for arts and culture. So the kinds of experiences they have with us at the Rubin Center, with visiting artists, in paid internships is really significant. Again, a lot of what we do is community outreach and interdisciplinary conversations and activities for all ages. Our audience is about half of campus, people from the university, and half from the community. Some from both sides of the border. This year has been a particularly hard year for that, but yeah, and we're reaching out in all different kinds of ways. So the work goes up, and then the work gets started, is what we say. So, once the shows are in the space, I think the heart of what we do really is having conversations and interactions sort of inspired on those shows. And again, over the years, we've developed a problematic specialty, which I hope becomes clear during our conversation, of having international artists come and make pieces about the US-Mexico border. There are many artists who are interested in this particular place for economic reasons and historical reasons and political reasons. And so again, we get artists that are larger than our budget who are interested in making work. And because we specialize in site-specific commissions, they're often able to make new pieces about the border that then travel other places. The tension I hope to kind of highlight in our conversation, and part of the reason I invited Leon and Edgar here today, is that obviously our artists who are visiting from other places have a mediated experience of the border. They've learned about the border from television and from magazines and newspapers. And it can sometimes be, their vision of the border can sometimes be at tension with people who have a lived experience in this place, who understand this border from their own personal histories and their negotiating of the borderlands every day. And so that's something that as we've matured as an organization, will be 15 years this year, that we're trying to address in more pointed ways and sort of finding ways to engage local artists in conversations about this place. So just going to run through a couple more slides. These deserve a lot more conversation, but I just want to give you an idea of the range of things that we do here at the Rubin Center. The other idea I'd like to give you is that it is not our full-time job to commission public artworks. It was no one's full-time job to commission this artwork. The year that we did the piece, we also did 9 exhibitions in our space. Leon is a professor at the University of Juárez and is also an artist. Edgar is an editor of a newspaper, does 100 things, and some of the other people that were on our project as well. Nobody had a background specifically in commissioning public art pieces, and nobody got we all did it in our spare time. It's something I think I should kind of point out about this piece. We gave it a lot of spare time, but this piece was really a collaboration of people, many more that are here on this call, who backed Raphael's vision to create this piece on the border. So the artist himself, again, this is something that could be a long presentation in and of itself, probably a whole week of a conference. Rafael Lozano-Hemmer is a Mexican-born electronic artist who lives in Canada, and he develops interactive installations that are at the intersection of architecture and performance art, in his own words. His main interest is in creating platforms for public participation by perverting technologies like robotics or computerized surveillance or telemetric networks. His large-scale interactions have been commissioned by cities, museums, and arts organizations around the globe. Just going to share literally a couple of them here today, just to kind of provide a bit of background, and just would really encourage you, if you're not familiar with his work, I'm sure that many of you are, that you take a look at some of the other interactive platforms that he's created, in addition to the work that he does for museums. I chose the piece Vectorial Elevation because, as Fiach mentioned, that piece was in Dublin in 2004, but its origins were in Mexico City, in the Zocalo here that you're looking at, and it was commissioned in 1999. It was originally designed to celebrate the arrival of the year 2000 in Mexico City Zocalo Square, and it's the first time that Raphael used spotlights in his work, and the spotlights are central to the Border Tuner project. In this piece, sorry, this is the version in Dublin. So, and then in this piece, the website enabled any internet user to design light sculptures across the city's center. So he had this very basic interface that people could access from anywhere in the world, actually, and create their own patterns of light. So it was an early work in which the users had full control over what was happening with the piece. It was sort of designed to, once the technology was up and once the concept was running, the artist steps back and allows the public to create their own after that quick overview, I just want to settle in then to this conversation about border tuner. Every time I do a presentation about this piece or try to share it with people, I'm just reminded of how many people are involved in the piece, how many different collaborators we had on both sides of the border, and how complex the piece is, and sort of how manic it ended up being because of everyone's aspirations and enthusiasm for what we were doing. But the border tuner conversation actually started for us in 2017 when Raphael reached out to us, largely out of concern for the U.S. administration, the president that we had at that time, who we don't say his name in our circles, but and his speaking out against immigration and his sort of rabid enjoyment of speaking ill of Mexican people, and also the very real immigration policies that he was putting into place. Raphael reached out to me because he had the interest in making a piece on the U.S.-Mexico border. His original suggestion when he reached out to me was this piece that you're looking at here, which is called Articulated Intersect. And Articulated Intersect was a large-scale installation that was designed for Montreal. It was co-produced by the Museum of Art there and produced a canopy of light throughout the two cities that could be modified using these ground level controllers by people on different sides of the city. So again, people had some control of the piece. The levers, which you don't see very clearly here, were almost like lightsabers, and people could move the pieces around. And his idea was to install this piece on the US-Mexico border. The way that we work at the Rubin Center, particularly when we're doing border projects, is before we make a commitment to an artist, we bring them here. We bring them here to the border, and they get a 3-day version of what I tried to do in 5 minutes at the top of our conversation, where they really get to see both sides of the border. For Raphael's visit, we contracted with the first co-curator that we had on this piece, Alejandro Morales, an excellent curator and artist in Juárez. And together we planned out a 2-day trip to both sides of the city, where Raphael could actually visit the wall. He could visit neighborhoods in both sides of the cities, visit Maquiladora, walk across the bridge himself. And then we arranged conversations in both cities as well with, at that time, just sort of an informal group of artists and people who were involved in both cities so that Raphael could pitch his idea. And it hit the ground like a rock. Everyone hated his idea a lot. And I have to say it's something that I really respect about Raphael as an artist, is that he sat through some very critical conversations on both sides of the border about the fact that we did not need another piece of military looking equipment at our border, that we didn't need these phallic symbols up in the sky, that we didn't need to highlight the division between the two places, that people come from outside and they don't understand the border. Again, I'm going to share something that, that was shared in these meetings that we challenged, I think, later on in our kind of reflection about this piece, but they really wanted to highlight the fact that the two cities are deeply connected. They're historically connected. They're connected through everyday relationships. They're connected through collaborations on both sides of the border, which is very, very true, even though that separation also exists. So Raphael went back to the drawing board and came up with a new piece for the border. And the piece that he proposed is the piece that we're going to look at and talk about today, which is Border Tuner. Border Tuner, as designed after this first set of meetings and visits, is a large-scale participatory art installation that is meant to highlight the connections between El Paso, Texas, and Ciudad Juárez. You can see from this picture, which is just a render of the piece, that there are powerful searchlights, which are visible from a 10-mile radius, that make what the artist conceives to be bridges of light between the two cities. These bridges of light, and you can see this here again, these first pictures I'm showing you are renders of the piece before it was actualized. The bridges of light, when they are connected across the two sides of the border, or when they're connected on the same side of the border, open up a sound channel. So when my light connects with your light, a sound channel opens between us and we can have a conversation. The concept of the piece was to put 3 of these listening stations on either side of the border. And this is an actual satellite map. You'll see on the top of the picture there is towards the north. That's the parking lot of Bowie High School, a high school that has a really long history in the United States. In El Paso, as being 99% Mexican or Mexican American. Many students cross the border every day to attend this high school. It has a long history in our city as being a point of entry for many families who are immigrating to the United States. And then in Juárez, in the Chamizal Park. And the Chamizal Park was created originally as a binational park between Mexico and the United States to deal with a wandering river, which became a wandering border. The park was created between the two spaces, but has never functioned as a binational park as such. But it is a place that's used or was used heavily by people in Juárez. Families are familiar with it and go down to the park all the time. You'll often see people around. Rafael, at these listening stations, created what is the tuner itself. It's the kind of central concept of the piece. It looks like a radio tuner. So when you tune the piece, you can tune the lights to scan across the sky from one side to the other. You yourself choose who you want to interact with. So when one set of lights connects with another set of lights and it stays there for a moment, you've opened up a sound channel. You can open up those channels on your own side of the border with people on, and the El Paso side or on the Juárez side, and you can open them across the border. The tuning concept for Rafael was about reflecting his own process of having these community conversations and really listening to the connections that already existed. So rather than coming in and either connecting or highlighting the divisions, to have a piece that would, even in its physical embodiment, be tuning and listening to what was already happening here. And you can kind of see what it looks like then to be at one side of the border or the other. This is sort of a picture, a render from Juárez looking towards El Paso. And this is the actual piece as it was functioning in November of 2019. So the next couple of photos I'll show you are from the piece itself. There's lots of things we can talk about, and I'm going to let Fiach and Leon and Edgar to some extent, and then our audience decide what we talk about today. But I do want to point out with this piece that this was about 2 years of very complex interactions between both cities. We had to get permission from the U.S. Border Patrol through the U.S. Homeland Security. We had to have police departments in both cities on board. We had to close off streets in both sides of the border. We had to set up a freestanding Wi-Fi network between the two cities, which we did with a company that has a presence in both cities called Transtelco. They gave us an in-kind donation. We had to raise almost $700,000, and that's another point that that could be a conversation point as we finish. That is probably easily 10 times as much as the combined artistic budgets of both cities for an entire year. And all of that money was raised outside of the region. So we had a lot of in-kind support here in El Paso and Juárez, but the money came from Mexico City and from the East Coast of the United States and New York and the surrounding region. So our big sponsors were Bloomberg Philanthropies, the Mellon Foundation, Via Art Fund, and Arte Abierto in Mexico. So none of that money came from this region, and that's an important point. This is the actual tuner as it existed in real life. And you can see this is what it looks like when this is actually 3 sets of lights sort of connecting together, but that's what the lights look like when they're connecting together. And during the evening, I'll talk a little bit about the beginning part of each evening, but during the evening when the piece was open, anyone could come up to the piece on either side of the border and participate. So we had about 11,000 visitors over the 14-night installation. And anyone could come up. It was free. There was, ample parking on both sides. You could just walk up and have whatever conversation you wanted to have. And it was actually profoundly moving. And I hope you get some sense of that when we share the video. I don't think those of us that worked on the project really intended to be, imagine that we would be quite as moved by the spontaneous conversations that happened as we were, but people who were connecting actually sometimes with actual relatives on either side of the border, people who were telling stories of having gone over across the border when they were younger, but they could no longer cross, asking questions about what it's like over there, are you afraid, all these sorts of things back and forth, talking about immigration, talking about, history together. So, yeah, and then the piece was also at the beginning of every night, we opened with a set program, and Edgar, who is on the call, was really, I can't express how central he was to that program. He came on the project somewhat late. I have to say the first year and a half, we really weren't sure that we were going to be able to do the project. We kept plowing ahead as we could, but Edgar came in once we knew we had the funding and we were ready to go, and was really central to arranging these cross-border conversations. So we had artists and musicians, some who knew each other, had played together on either sides of the border before, some who met for the first time. We had environmental activists, we had LGBTQ plus activists, we had Native voices, feminists, all sorts of conversations across the border. So the first half hour, 45 minutes of each evening was a curated conversation that happened. And this is Yolanda Leva, who is the director of public history, but also a Native activist and an immigration activist in El Paso, giving the opening comments the first night. Yeah, and I show you a couple of the pictures here of people who are involved in that opening conversation. And then the lights as they're seen from just outside the piece itself. So what I'd like to do is invite Roshan to please share the video now. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. The video is about 4 minutes long, and I think it'll give you a real sense of what the piece is like in real life. And after that, we will jump into the conversation part of it, and I can sit back maybe a little bit. So.
Nuestra fortaleza se basa también en nuestras familias, en ver cómo nos han destruido, cómo nos han destruido. Todos nuestros, ¿cuántos más para defendernos? Vienen y se dan con las nuestras, ¿cuántas más para defendernos? Vienen y se dan con los nuestros, ¿cuántos más para defendernos? ¿Cuántas más? ¿Cuántos más? La canción es triste, llora las trompetas en estas bases. Lírica combativa, activista, no kamikaze. Oveja negra Thompson, pues en la línea de ataque. Esta es la historia, pasó en la Josefa Ortiz, en la colonia Ciudad Juárez, 1405-2019. Un año más de vida.
Hola, Ana Gaby.
Gabriel. Chiriscos. ¿Cómo estás?
Bien.
Te extraño.
Tengo 15 años.
Yo también.
No te creas, tengo 8.
¿Tienes 8 años?
No te creas, 7, 8.
Yo sé que tienes 8, oye. Oye, ¿cómo te fue en la escuela?
No me acuerdo.
¿No te acuerdas? ¿Jugaste? ¿Poquito?
No.
¿Hiciste tarea? Eso sí, me platicó
sí.
un pajarito.
Sí.
¡Qué padre!
Qué pena verte perdido, como que pierdo una estrella que se eleva al infinito.
My name is Dee Margo. I'm honored to be the mayor of El Paso, Texas. My great-great-grandmother came from Mexico. My great-grandmother came from Mexico. And my grandfather, who was reared in Rio Grande City, Texas, did not speak English till he was 18 and went to the University of Texas at Galveston. People do not understand that we have been one binational, bilingual, bicultural region over 100 years before the United States was even founded. We are unique, we are special, and there is nowhere else in the Western Hemisphere like El Paso, Juárez.
Great. So Kerry, you can hear me, can you?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, thank you very much for that presentation. And just to maybe invite your colleagues Edgar and Leon into the onto our maybe they could switch on their cameras. And while we're doing that, just to remind our participants and attendees at this session that just if you have any questions or any comments to share, just put them in the Q&A. I'm going to try and mediate that and work through that. So we'll also post up Leon and Edgar's biogs, but so not to waste time. Welcome, gentlemen, and welcome, Kerry. Just to dive in, it appears to me I'm interested in the original, and thank you for sharing with us the kind of honesty that Raphael had to face with regards to his first attempt at engaging with the border scenario, the border context, both socio and geopolitical. There seems to be multiple entry points, both for the work for the public and also for the participants. So I'd like Kerry, Leon, and Edgar to just kind of unwrap that for us a little bit. You've conveniently put into kind of you mentioned, Kerry, 2 years of complex negotiations and discussion, and you flew by that. So perhaps maybe give us a flavor. It is a site-specific work, and of course, as we know, in terms of site specificity, that's to do with people, it's to do with locations, to do with ideologies, to do with people's uncomfortableness, but also your own sense of growing curatorial, I suppose, interjection into the piece and how that relates to Raphael's intentions as well.
And I do want to say it wasn't just that first conversation where Rafael took a lot of criticism from everybody. I mean, I have to say again, like he took a lot of criticism all the way through and quite graciously. And but so that when Rafael first came, whenever we're doing projects like this, again, our staff is super tiny. So we put together teams and we try to find out who can help us on things, all sorts of things. And I'm kind of quite used to that. We also have a policy of never saying no to an artist's first idea, just listening. But his proposal was just so much more complex than anything we had ever tried along the border. Most of our border projects that are at the border wall, we've done in a guerrilla style where we don't ask for permission and we do it long enough to document. The person who's not on this call, who was really important those first 2 years, was Mario Porras. He, like every member of our team, and I want to say that from PR to to Leon and Edgar sitting here, myself, are all people who are really bilingual, bicultural, have lived on both sides of the border. So Mario comes from a business background. He also worked for a politician, Beto O'Rourke, that some of your audience might be familiar with, and in dealing with border issues for a lot of years. And he did a lot of getting the permissions of being there at the US-Mexico border, which we obviously had to do properly for that level of an installation. Lots of conversations with Border Patrol, who themselves are border people here in El Paso. So, they were people who had some sympathy for the project and who often wanted to tell us about their own roots in Juárez. But also getting the two cities to work together, and getting all of these like complex permissions. I mean, there are very different processes in Mexico and the United States to get permission to close the streets, to have security, all of those sorts of things. And there was just months and months of that sort of behind the scenes work that often doesn't get credited when we share about this project. But Mario Porras's work and his ability to really function seamlessly on both sides of the border as both a Mexican national and a US national was integral to us making this happen. So, yeah.
And Leon, do you want to add to that?
Well, as Kerry mentioned before, I came into the project once the border tuner proposal was in place. And I wasn't part of the project in the previous iteration. Once I started getting in, and I think that something that both Kerry and I kept going back to was the enormity of the whole thing compared to everything else we had done before. I don't even know how many times we've worked together in transborder collaborations in one way or another. But this felt kind of like the PhD dissertation, defense, whatever type of deal, working on this thing on Border Tuner. I remember when I started getting into the project and getting the feel for it, I was very uncomfortable with the amount of money that this was going to take. I was also very uncomfortable with the amount of permits and the amount of asking that we needed to do. Because
I
I'm sorry?
I saw a video.
Not asking.
Raphael had a video looking for money as well. He put a corporate kind of ask together as well. Can I ask you?
Well,
at what point did this become apparent, Kerry, in terms of your time limit? You said 2 years. Did you envisage it being 2 years? And then at what point did you create a monster? Did you feel you were creating a monster in this public?
Originally, Raphael wanted to do it in 1 year. Was pushing really hard to do it in 1 year. I mean, it became really clear pretty early on that was not going to happen. But again, it was the funds came largely through his profile as an artist. I think, and he was working at that scale before, so it's very clear how much his work cost. So that the work, just simply the spotlights themselves, the engineers that are needed for those spotlights, not to mention the studio team that's needed to run those and develop those. We knew it was going to be a very, very expensive project from the beginning, and we also knew that it was not. I mean, our local budgets are so small. I mean, our budgets are small, like compared to people in large cities and things like that. Juárez, I mean, it's almost non-existent, and that's been, as Leon said, we've been collaborating together for more than 10 years on lots of cross-border projects, and that infrastructure continues to be that imbalance in infrastructure is an enormous problem. Anytime we want to do something, there's just not the infrastructure on the Juárez side of the border, which means that the conversations are led from the U.S. side of the border in ways that that create an imbalance, a natural imbalance all around. So
Leon, back to you. So money and time became your kind of obstacles at the beginning.
Well, more than obstacles, just discomfort, and just going quick or back to the idea of requesting the support of rich people from the area, which ended up not supporting it in almost at all. Zero exactly. I remember kind of walking into meetings and seeing people who I've made documentaries about their abuses and about how they have taken over lands that didn't belong to them. And, all of a sudden kind of like being in the same room with people or representatives of this type of people was quite, I don't know, it was just uncomfortable to deal with that. But so that put this project on a whole different just aspect and level of how to work with it. I was also honestly quite excited by the idea of working with Rafael Lozano-Hemmer, whose work I've been following since, like anybody who's a professional in the art world, following his work for the last 10 years or however many years. So it was a set of conflicting kind of situations that was very well represented in how the project kind of came about and how the project evolved into what it became. One of the issues that we all felt very strongly about was that the installation didn't only need to be a mirror image of itself across the border in terms of form, but it also needed to be a mirror of itself in terms of content, and in terms of labor relations, and in terms of how much money people were paid. And that in itself became such an interesting exercise of recognizing these asymmetries and this way that these so-called sister cities really behave in a very, very asymmetrical way. And I think that ended up being one of my favorite lessons from this entire experience, was how to turn these symmetries into a meaningful opportunity to engage with the public, and to make it visible in a rhetoric that otherwise works so very hard to make it invisible. We like to talk about how equal we are. We like to talk about how inclusive we are. We like to talk about how we experience border life differently, and that is true. But these asymmetries and these balances of power and economic power and cultural power are also very much true.
And then Edgar, you became involved with the project, obviously, as working with the participants. Did you understand the symmetry of power, or the symmetry of lack of power between both sides at this stage?
Well, I mean, before I start, hi, thank you for inviting me, by the way. When I first came into the project, I had experience on the asymmetries, as it's been told, of the border based on my own experience, but having to talk to people on both sides of the border, trying to invite them, because I guess we realized at some point that in order to make the project successful, we have to make sure that we incorporated local people as much as possible. So that's why the decision came about to have this like openings every night with local artists and
can
local,
I ask you, Edgar, at what point in the process, what point in the planning process was that decision became a self-conscious, overt process in the making of the work?
I want to say it was probably when Kerry and Leon invited me to the project. You know, I want to say that they took that into consideration before they invited me, because I want to say that, right? Like, I mean, I feel like
Yeah,
I wasn't like.
It was part of the vision all along, because I think it's been part of some of Raphael's earlier projects where he works with local partners to kind of activate the projects. But we really fought for Edgar to be hired on for that specific role. I mean, we didn't have a paid role to do that in the initial concept of the project. And it became clear that that really was the heart of the project. I mean, the interactions that happened spontaneously were fantastic, but I think the heart of the project was the work that Edgar did in coordinating cross-border conversations. So, yeah.
So Edgar, yes.
So yeah, and I mean, my role was to talk to, like I was saying, artists and community organizers and different organizations from across the border, and to convince them to be a part of the project. You know, a lot of them were very receptive, a lot of them were not, and that's when I started seeing the big differences of how people reacted to this project. You know, and to be honest, El Pasoans were a little bit easier to approach. I feel like El Pasoans, like the collaborators from El Paso, were a little bit easier to talk to, and they understood the magnitude and the possibilities that the project had. But talking to people in Juárez, it was there was a little bit more resistance, and it was some really tough conversations about what this project does for the community, who's gaining from this project. Is it the artists? Is it the institutions that are working with it? Is it the people that are donating? What?
I think he's frozen.
I think he's frozen. Well, can I go back while Edgar is frozen there, just to sorry, Edgar, you're back with us. Your camera froze for a second there.
Oh, sorry about that. Is it doing a little bit better?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Just you're coming to the challenge of both sides of the border in terms of mediating this work and how people participated in the work.
Okay. Yes. Sorry, I'm back, right? Yeah. Can you hear me now? Okay. Cool. Perfect. So yeah, I mean, it was just this talking about the asymmetry of El Paso and Juárez, and can you hear me? Okay. Oh, thank you. Sorry. It became evident, you know, like I was saying, El Pasoans are more receptive to the project, and people from Juárez were a little bit less receptive, and they were more questioning about like how this would benefit us and how this would benefit the community in Juárez, and that comes from the fact that a lot of people from the border, especially from Juárez, feels like there's all these people from outside always coming to the border, gaining something, getting a story, research, doing a project that highlights a little bit of what this artist from outside think is important, but leaves a big part of our reality outside of the picture. So it was very tough conversation, like I said, especially from people in Juárez, and why this project is happening and who is benefiting. And at the end, I guess everybody made a commitment and realized that this was like a project that we had to own, you know, even though it was in a way placed upon us. It was like something that came from the outside and happened here. It was still a platform for us to take and to utilized to tell what our story said. And that's why people reacted to it in a positive way. And we ended up being able to get a super large group of people. Over 250 people participated in the openings of the of each night of Border Tuner, and I was very happy that people owned that. You know, that we're able to see past what the original meaning could be, or what it could do for the artist or for anyone else involved, and what we did. And I think that's what we've done as Border people all the time, is take the opportunity that's given to us to try to tell our stories.
Yeah, I mean, to bring Leon and Kerry into this, and I know it's only the video, and I know the video can convey a particular view or particular impact, but one of the things, having read around it and discussed it, I get a great sense of joy coming out of the process. Could I ask Leon or Kerry to respond to that? Yes, there was a serious part, and we can talk about the surveillance, we can talk about but I certainly get a sense from the participatory process that joy was a part of the impact.
Yeah. Oh, so go ahead, Kerry. Okay. Yeah. So I think that the curated programming was very much kind of designed with the idea of creating some sort of joy and some sort of just enjoyment. And because it wasn't only the Border Tuner by itself, but there was something that we call the community tent, where people could just hang out and maybe give some workshops and maybe just have a soda pop, because we that's all we had, I believe, and maybe some elotes. And you know, so it was, and then there was also kind of like the more academic space where conferences were being held, and were being, and more academic serious discussions were occurring. And the fact that in the Juárez side, El Chamizal was chosen for logistical reasons, but also there's very deep historical implications in the choice of El Chamizal, as Kerry alluded to in her presentation, and also very very deep social reasons, where people do go there and celebrate Easter Sunday. That's kind of like the typical place that Juarenses go to spend Easter Sunday, or just kind of like most Sundays during the summer and the springtime. And so a lot was, a great effort was made to have this be a joyous occasion. And as Rafael often reminded us, if people come here expecting to be amazed by lights, they're gonna be sorely disappointed, because there's only so much that the lights are gonna do for you. You know, you go there, you look at them, and so unless we, and so we knew that we had to work very hard in order to create an entire environment that would be inviting and enveloping to the people that attended.
Great. Just to take from that, and I want to invite any attendees who may have questions for us as we wind down. But Edgar, I was interested in what you were saying, and in some of my preparatory work with Kerry. At what point during the process, or was it at the beginning, that you started looking at the possible, what I would call, impact? Now, not that's the academic impact, there's the critical impact, but just in terms of legacy, having done this project, and I invite all three of you to give your views of looking back now. It's what, almost 2 years or a year and a half or so forth. What kind of impact do you think that work has had? And do you think it's opened up your practice as curators, but also maybe laid a foundation for future interventions by other international artists?
Oh, well, definitely. First question, like at what point I realized the importance and the impact that it had. I think it happened, I mean, everything was so fast paced, everything was happening like so quickly, that it was not until, and we're like organizing and talking to people like up until the very day before the opening. It was not until the actual Border Tuner piece opened that we started listening to these activations and to these people singing and to these people talking, everybody with their own message, everybody with their own ideas and their own stories pretty much being told, that that's the moment where I realized how powerful it was to have this back and forth of communication. I remember the first night of Border Tuner, the opening was between two members of indigenous groups, and we invited them for the first or second night, if I'm not mistaken, and just the conversation that they had was so impactful that I realized, wow, this is like, you know, like the lights pretty much like dimmed and disappeared because everybody was just paying attention to these two people talking and what they had to say. In terms of how this developed my practice, I mean, I don't think there could have been another project that could have brought so many people together. And there was like so many connections created. I mean, like we like to say that the connections are already there and the back and forth is already there, but we did bring together an extreme amount, like a big amount of people, an extraordinary group of people that are doing community work and artistic work. And it was like a hub for 10 or 12 days for these people to meet each other and talk to each other and recognize each other. So like up until now, I've seen these collaborations continue. I've seen people that met during Border Tuner continue to do projects between themselves. I've seen, so definitely there was a network that was highlighted and created that maybe couldn't have happened otherwise.
Okay, Leon.
Well, the first question about realizing kind of the impact. So I live quite far away from the city, about a 45-minute drive away. And every night after getting from Juárez, yeah. And so out in the country. And so every night after closing down for the night or whatever, I would drive home and I would call my girlfriend on the phone, on hands-free, and because she was living in Mexico City at the moment. And all of these conversations were being broadcasted or streamed online. And so she would spend a good portion of her night listening to these conversations happening across the border in a city far away from where she resided at the moment. And she wasn't very familiar with Juárez at the time. Now she's living here, but at the time she wasn't. And the conversations that I had with her about the conversations that he heard streaming online between people of Juárez and El Paso, I think made me realize kind of like the impact that this could have in terms of the narratives that are told and that dominate border and trans-border conversations, trans-border realities. So my thought there was, if more people from outside of Juárez and El Paso get to listen to this, then the narrative of Juárez and El Paso can become something different. So that was a very meaningful moment or series of moments for me. And as far as the legacy goes, there's two sets of very specific legacies that are important here. One is called the Trans-Border Art Fund, which Rafael donated $10,000 to be distributed among trans-border artists that are working in the Juárez-El Paso border, and that we are in the process of distributing the last half of that. So, and right now we are supporting 6 projects that are created by Mexican and Juárez and El Paso artists that deal with the realities of the border. And that has put in motion a series of other things that can happen to where we can make this a fund that can exist beyond the initial donation. So that's a very important part of the legacy of Border Tuner. The second part of the legacy of Border Tuner that I am quite interested in and excited for as soon as it becomes available is the archive. The archive of the conversations. Every conversation that was held was recorded, knowingly recorded. People knew, were aware of that they were being recorded. And I think that whenever that archive does become available, that will become such an interesting and just kind of like a thing of wonder in terms of what are the stories that are told about Juárez and El Paso. I am super excited about that becoming available hopefully soon.
And Kerry, just your role as the curator, your own kind of practice, looking back at the work, what has been the kind of the feedback for yourself, your own kind of learning from this in terms of being a legacy project?
Well, I mean, I think, I do want to say really clearly here, like what a fantastic artist Rafael is. We've said that a little bit, but part of the reason his piece disappeared was just what a magnificent installation it was, and a magnificent piece of technology. And so so that was really a gift to work with. But I think like Leon and Edgar, my thoughts moving away from that are a lot more about supporting infrastructure for local artists, which has always been an interest. And Leon and I, again, have worked on a lot of projects over the years, and also worked on kind of developing an ethic of transborder projects just based on our own experiences and the things that we've learned. It's something that we've written about and presented about. But at the moment, I am thinking we continue to work with international artists as part of our mission, and that's an important thing that we do. But we're working right now on developing a new program in community engaged practices to kind of model these practices for our students, and to begin to look for funding that will allow us to create some of this infrastructure so these projects have more balance. And I've always been interested in border artists. I think we all have, we all are very deeply a part of this community. But certainly, in particular, well, my conversations with both Leon and Edgar, for different reasons and in different projects, we have a lot of conversations about how to support the artistic vision from people who have a lived experience here on the US-Mexican border and a much more complex understanding of this place than is possible to convey through, the media.
And is there an understanding kind of tension there between the mission of the Rubin Center, which is about bringing international artists to kind of reflect on what's going on the border, and say locally based artists collaborating?
Yeah, there's always been a tension. I mean, there's a tension in that work. I do actually believe very strongly in our mission, particularly for our student body, to be bringing artists from other places. Many of them will not leave the region in the 4 years that they're studying, studio art. So that, I feel like that's important, and the conversation's important. But yeah, there's a tension there. And, the funding we got for this project was really 100% because of Raphael. I mean, I wrote a bunch of grants, but it was Raphael's, trajectory and really to some extent connections. He also, I want to mention, donated his own time and his studio's time, to the project as well. So that's why that happened. So it's not as if I can easily transfer those funds into what we're doing, but I am really trying to open up that conversation. So if contemporary art is meant to be a reflection of lived experience, if all of the pieces are being made and all the money is coming from these sort of centers of power, in the coast of the United States or in the center of Mexico, then we're missing a whole part of the human experience. And so that funding question is really important. It's sort of making that argument that we need to be thinking about funding works in all sorts of margins and peripheries, not just the US-Mexico border, but people who really know these places and have a different experience of contemporary life need to have the infrastructure to share that experience outward. So.
Could you, we've a few questions now coming in, so we'll concentrate on some of these questions before we conclude. But one of them is, are locally based artists collaborating across the border? And can you give us some examples of that?
For sure. I mean, a lot of the artists that we were working with already had collaborations. I don't know, Edgar, maybe is the best one to answer this, but you're muted.
Edgar, yeah.
There it is. Yeah. Well, definitely. I mean, like Leon was saying right now, with a transborder fund for the money that Rafael gave to the border, that funding is going specifically for transborder projects. That's one of the examples. But to be honest, here at the border, most of the artists are doing transborder work. There's like a lot of collaboration, a lot of back and forth, and some of it is very clear, maybe like very specific. You decide to do a border, a project that applies to both sides of the border, but also the economics of it. A lot of times it's, for some reason, easier to produce in Juárez, for example. So you have to get to know people in Juárez to print stuff or work with you because it's more accessible. Also, just the nature of us artists on the border that pretty much go back and forth, like the few of us, I guess, that have that access to go back and forth. We grab from both sides all the time. I currently am the editor of a magazine called Azul Arena, and that magazine highlights the culture and arts on both sides of the border, but it's also built around collaboration. So I try to create connections between artists from both sides, between either like writing or creating new pieces of art. But in general, I feel like that's something that's been happening recently, or maybe for quite a while.
Great. Another question coming in. Thank you, Edgar, for that. Another question is, why do you think the support for the project was better in El Paso than in Juarez? Do you think it might have been to do with the culture policies in place in the US versus Mexico? So the reception of the work, the support of the work in both cities. Leon, could I ask you to maybe respond to that?
Yeah, I do want to take a stab at that. So Juarez has a long history of being kind of like this area in perpetual conflict, right? Since early 90s or mid 90s with what is now known as Las Muertas de Juárez, the dead women in Juárez that kept appearing. And then in the 2000s and 2010s, Felipe Calderón's drug war turned Juárez into just a devastating site of chaos. And throughout that time, plenty of artists have come in, done whatever they need to do, kind of turn their experience into objects or into videos or into whatever, gone away, exhibited them in somewhere else, and never truly committed to the people that remain here. This has been true for both Mexican artists and international artists, writers, you name it, So we have a very troubled relationship with the idea of outsiders coming in, trying to do something with our reality, and then just sort of leaving our reality behind. I don't know if El Paso has had that experience yet.
Not to that extreme, I don't think. You know what I mean? I really don't. It's just sort of when people come to talk about the border, I mean, like certainly El Paso experiences that to some extent, but their interest really is from the wall south, and not from El Paso inwards. And so I'd also think there's a very prominent example. We don't have time to go into, but very prominent examples in the Juarez community of projects that had direct impact on artists and the sort of asymmetry of people coming from outside. I wanted to mention again, just to kind of shout out again to Alejandro Morales, who was the original co-curator on the project. It was really nice to have both Leon and Alejandro involved, but Alejandro had a project at the time, Proyectos Impala in Juarez, that was specifically about having international artists like reinsert their work into the Juarez community at this kind of mobile site, so that if pieces were made about Juarez that had never been shown in Juarez, they were shown in this mobile gallery that he took to neighborhoods all around the city. And it was a very interesting project that was dealing with that precisely. Like, if you're going to come and make work about the city, show the work here, and let's have some sort of conversation or response about it. So, yeah.
Very good. Very good. Okay, well, look, I want to just thank you, Leon and Edgar and Kerry, for a really fantastic conversation. I think what we've learned is around site specificity is also the idea of locating yourself and leaving something behind rather than just disappearing. And so that impact on the various communities has to be quite considered. And really, on behalf of everybody, I want to thank you all for your for this discussion. I've certainly learned a lot, and congratulations to all of you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us. And just to let the attendees know that this site for the Transborder Art Fund is there in case you want to look at it and look at some of the projects that we're supporting. We're super proud of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Leon. Thank you, Kerry. And thank you, Edgar. Okay.
Thank you.